Okay, this is lecture 2, part 2. We're talking about emerging infectious diseases. Um, an important one to describe is Ebola hemorrhagic fever. Ebola hemorrhagic fever is caused by the Ebola virus, which looks like this. It's a long filamentous shaped virus. It has this long filamentous shape you can see here. Um, the virus causes fever and muscle pain that rapidly progress to vomiting and diarrhea, and it's bleeding, vomiting, bleeding, diarrhea. It's accompanied by internal and external hemorrhaging, and the progression is very, very rapid once a person is infected. This disease was first identified in what was called at the time, I think, what was called the Congo, and now is the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC. And there's outbreaks every few years of it in other parts of Africa and in not just the DRC, but also in adjoining countries. And there have been outbreaks actually also in the largest outbreak was in mid-western Africa, in this area here that I'm going to just highlight. One of the largest outbreaks was in this area here, Sierra Leone, Guinea, Cote d'Ivoire area. The thing about Ebola is this is quite a frightening disease because of its incredibly high mortality rate. The usual mortality rate or fatality rate was 90-95%. What happened was that there was quite a large outbreak in Midwestern Africa in 2014, again in this area here on the map shown here, in Guinea and Cote d'Ivoire and Liberia, Sierra Leone. Cote d'Ivoire is Ivory Coast here. So there was this large outbreak, the largest outbreak that has ever occurred, and they had a total of 28,000 cases and 11,000 roughly deaths, a fatality rate of approximately 40%, which it sounds strange, but is a raging success actually, because normally in the past the mortality rates were 90% and 95%. Because they had a lot of cases and they developed quite a bit of experience over time due to the number of cases and the length of time that it persisted, this particular outbreak persisted, they came up with better treatments. But the other thing was that they also came up with an effective preventive vaccine, which was developed actually originally here in Canada. The outbreak actually was declared a international public health emergency and did in 2014 and did not end until 2016. And as I said, it led to a better understanding of how to treat and an effective preventive vaccine. Since then, there have been a series of outbreaks in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, starting in 2018 and still ongoing this year. The fatality rate is approximately 65%. They have been using the vaccine, but well, there are political problems. Politics and infectious disease do not mix well, especially when there's conflict or rebellion, armed conflicts in different regions, which do occur in the DRC. In any case, Ebola is one of these diseases that has jumped, that occasionally emerges in human populations because it jumps from animals into humans. There are a lot of emerging infectious diseases that have which are examples of microorganisms which normally infect a certain animal population, then jumps to a different animal population, including sometimes humans. And because humans have never been exposed to it before, it races through, it causes epidemic or even pandemics. And Ebola is one of them. It's believed to originate in bats and occasionally carry over into humans. Okay, another type of emerging infectious disease are prion-mediated diseases. This is a fairly complex topic. It's extremely difficult to just give you a light intro here in one slide, but I'll try. Prions are not really living organisms at all. They do not contain, and this was, believe me, it took a lot of effort on the part of scientists to get this proven and accepted by journals and other scientists, that this causative agent of a neuropathological disease process does not contain any nucleic acid. There is no DNA, there's no RNA in this. It is protein only. And that's actually the protein only is how they came up with this prion name. One of the diseases that is a prion-mediated disease is called bovine spongiform encephalopathy. All of these diseases, related prion-mediated diseases, in fact, are spongiform encephalopathies. What that term means is it is a diseased brain tissue, and it has a sponge-like appearance. And this actually is a photomicrograph, a microscopic photograph of neural brain tissue showing the sponge-like appearance. Eventually, the tissue becomes full of small holes, just like a sponge. Now, what happened was that it started out, well, there are a number of different diseases affecting a number of different animals, but it really came to people's attention with mad cow disease. Mad cow disease is the common name mad cow disease is the mad cow disease is the common name used by people, the public, to describe bovine spongiform encephalopathy, mad cow disease. Bovine refers to cow. What happened was, in fact, cattle were being fed sheep offal. Offal is are the viscera and anything that's left over after the sheep are slaughtered, and whatever is not used for the food industry was being ground up and incorporated into feed for cattle. So in order to increase the protein content in that feed, and the feed are these dried pellets which have grains and protein sources in them. In order to increase the protein content, they would grind up all the waste organs and neural tissue and brain and everything, and incorporate it into cattle feed. And the sheep, there is a prion-mediated disease in sheep called scrapie, and I'll talk about this in more detail later in the course, but there is a disease that's mediated by prions in sheep, and the disease is a spongiform. It causes spongiform encephalopathy, and the disease is called scrapie. Okay, it's difficult writing with this. Scrapie. Now what happened was that animals suffering from scrapie were used as a source, were butchered in abattoirs, and the offal, the waste viscera or organs were used to make feed, high protein feed for cattle. So the cattle got bovine spongiform encephalopathy. They got the disease, and then humans eating the beef from these animals with BSE developed a prion disease called variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. So mad cow disease occurs in cows, and it's also used by the public to describe the disease in humans, that it's mad cow disease that they caught because they catch it from infected beef. But the true name of the disease process in humans is called variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease. It's enough for you to know VCJD. Okay, variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease is a bit of a mouthful. So it's a disease in humans which was transferred from sheep to cattle and from the cattle to humans. There's many examples of it, and a big problem now is that it is present in wild populations of animals that are hunted in North America. It is spreading throughout North America. The prion disease that they suffer from is called chronic wasting disease, and it's now found in deer and elk and moose. It is spreading wider and wider now, and you know, it's going to affect that the hunting industry, which is a huge thing. Okay, I'll talk more about prions, and I'll describe more about this disease later in the course. Let's move on. And this is hantavirus. I sort of struggled with whether I should include this. It's not a bad thing to include. I suppose it's first seen in the United States in '95. It's identified as a virus. The disease is hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, but it's caused by hantavirus carried in mice. They carry it, so the virus is shed in the urine and feces, and if people breathe that in, then they can develop it, and it's associated with fairly severe respiratory symptoms. Let's move on. Another important emerging infectious disease is AIDS. This disease is caused by the HIV virus, right? Human immunodeficiency virus. It was first identified in 1981 as a disease because of an outbreak among young homosexual males. There was an outbreak of fairly rare type of tumor that's normally hardly ever seen, and there was also of an outbreak among that population, a number of cases in the population of opportunistic infections that usually only would occur in someone who is severely immunosuppressed. Turns out, in the end, that they were infected with HIV, a virus that is believed to have jumped from monkey populations. You know, people hunt and eat what's in the forest, and if your forest contains monkeys, then you're going to be eating it. It's not that unusual for prey-predator relationships to also include that if you look at the predator, they'll carry viruses and have viruses from the prey. And humans are no different. Humans are predators. If they're hunting, and you can go to markets in Africa and find, you know, people have killed a monkey and are selling it as bushmeat. So it seems to have crossed quite a while ago into the human population. It's a sexually transmitted disease affecting males and females. It's not restricted at all to just homosexual populations and heterosexual also. Symptoms are now treatable, but there is no cure. You can't be cleared entirely of the virus. If you stop taking drugs that are antiviral, you will come down again with symptoms, serious symptoms. So yes, the symptoms can be treated, and people who are infected with HIV can live for an extended period of time, but the actual cure is not yet being developed. Okay, so that's acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. The virus, what it does is it infects and destroys T lymphocytes. Okay, so it causes immunodeficiency, a loss of immune function because of the effect on T cells, T lymphocytes. Let's move on. Now, I want to talk about a group of diseases that is caused by a family of viruses called coronaviruses. The first point I want to make in terms of coronaviruses is that there are several coronaviruses which cause they cause common cold. Common cold can be caused by certain coronaviruses. It also is caused by rhinoviruses. But what emerged in early part of this century, in 2003, in fact, was a disease which was named Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome, or SARS. It was identified to have been caused by a virus called SARS-CoV. Okay. So that's SARS-associated coronavirus. You should know the name of the virus, SARS-CoV, and the disease, SARS, right? Here's an electron micrograph of SARS virus particles showing the characteristic, I'll highlight it, the characteristic proteins on the surface around on the envelope of the virus. I'll tell you later soon in the course what an envelope is, but it has these spike proteins all over the surface. It's characteristic of the coronavirus. Corona, in fact, in Latin, it means, I shouldn't have done it in that color. Corona, in fact, means crown, right? Corona beer, it's got a crown on it, I believe, right? Now this viral infection first appeared in China, 2003, and over the next few months spread rapidly to 24 countries all over the world. It was a pandemic. It spread into all these areas. The numbers were kept low because the symptoms were fairly strong and were identified quickly, could be identified quickly. But there was a 10% fatality rate, which is very serious. The outbreak was actually very successfully contained. Now, successfully contained does not bring much satisfaction to those who lost someone to the disease, those who died. The 10% of cases that resulted in death, but overall, considering the threat and how it spreads fairly easily, it was a success that it was contained. Now, with this kind of a disease in the background and what was known at the time, it was clear to many people, to anyone who studied microbiology, I would guess, that it could reemerge. And I've taken this slide and I highlighted this. This slide has not changed since I first wrote it in 2000. Well, the oldest one I could find is 2008. I started teaching this course in 2005 or 6, I can't remember. But I had this sentence on that original. When I look back on my files, I found the oldest one I could find was from 2008, and I'd written this on the slide, because that's what happens with these kind of diseases when they emerge from populations of animals into the human population. And it happens often enough, and it has to be taken seriously, and the world has to be prepared for that event. And sure enough, in 2012, MERS was first reported. It started in Saudi Arabia. Now, in the case with SARS, it is believed, not 100% certain, that the virus with SARS virus, or SARS-CoV, it came from a population of a type of wild cat called a civet, although that animal could have gotten it from those type of animals could have gotten it from bats, but it passed from civets into humans. It's believed in Saudi Arabia, it's known fairly clearly that it came from infected camels and into humans. Cases occurred throughout the Middle East in all of these countries, and later into Europe, and there were cases in South Korea and the United States. Fatality rate 35%. When a disease, an infectious disease, when the onset is rapid and when the symptoms are very strong, that actually helps in preventing spread of the disease, because people show symptoms early, and so precautions can be rapidly taken. There isn't a period of time where there are very few symptoms or people with no symptoms. When everyone who catches the infection gets symptoms, when they're severe symptoms, then often that lends itself to containing the disease. Now, I believe it hasn't been completely eradicated. There may still be cases of MERS occurring. I have a link here that you can look at and find out more about it. That was this, and it's caused by a certain type of coronavirus. And here you see the classical type of picture of again, electron micrograph showing, let me see if I can get a color that you can know, showing these protein spikes on the surface all around here. You can see, again, a type of coronavirus. Well, as a further update to the information I've given you on MERS, there have in fact still been cases reported. The disease has not been completely eradicated. That is, as of June 2021, it's still there are still cases that are reported, and you can read about that if you want at this using this website or web page. The reason there are still cases would be because there are still a few who spread the disease. For the most part, the disease does not spread to too many others that easily, because there is no extended asymptomatic period in which the person who's infected can spread it to others very easily. The onset of symptoms, signs and symptoms, as I said earlier, is very rapid, and they're quite severe, so people get quite sick, and they seek treatment, or they're taken for treatment. It's diagnosed and taken for treatment fairly rapidly before they can spread it to too many others. Or there's still virus causing MERS spreading from the animal host camels into the human population. In any case, both SARS and MERS emerged into the human population from animal sources. And SARS was eradicated completely. MERS is still present. However, a more serious occurrence of coronavirus type outbreak occurred in December 2019 with the emergence of a coronavirus called SARS-CoV-2. This is the cause of the disease called COVID-19. It was first reported, there were human cases reported in Wuhan, China in December of 2019. And it very quickly spread throughout the world. There are only a small number of very tiny island states or nations in the Pacific and a couple in the Caribbean that have not reported any cases at all, or that very rapidly isolated and eradicated the disease. There are two fairly large countries in Asia that claim to never have had a case, but this is a prime example, an excellent example of how politics can affect public health policy. And it always does, but these are extreme cases where there's complete denial. It's unfortunate when politics enters into public health considerations, but it's not uncommon at all throughout the world, in fact. In any case, as of mid-August, after first being reported 8 or 9 months earlier, by mid-August 2020, there were 24 million reported cases and more than 800,000 deaths attributed to COVID-19, to the SARS-CoV-2 virus. 1 year later, as of mid-August 2021, 209, almost 210 million confirmed cases and more than roughly 4.5 million deaths. These are conservative numbers because there are many individuals who were completely asymptomatic, had the infection, recovered and never had any symptoms, and so weren't aware and never were tested. It could easily be twice as many or even more who in fact were infected. So these numbers are fairly conservative. The thing with COVID-19, the reason why it's such a, from the point of view of the virus, such a successful type of viral infection that can continue spreading, is hard to eradicate, is that many cases are asymptomatic. In other cases, there's a long asymptomatic period in which individuals are still infectious. And so these people go untested, completely untested if they're completely asymptomatic when infected, or untested during the asymptomatic period and don't know that they're spreading the disease. So it continues on. It's very hard to eradicate that kind of disease. The key thing is the fact that vaccines, multiple vaccines were developed. So the fatality rate has dropped very significantly due to two factors. Mainly, I should have put this as number one, mainly the development of vaccines, but also the development of greatly improved treatments that are used in people who are severely ill. So even though it is no longer, at the 5 to 10% fatality rate, it's still a significant viral disease infection that persists in the human population. Let's move on. Zika virus. Zika virus is also an emerging infectious disease, spread mostly, again in this case it's a vector, spread by mosquitoes biting humans. It's spread by mostly by two species of mosquito that can get infected with the virus, so it can pick it up from an infected human and bite another human and spread the disease that way. These are aggressive daytime biters mostly, but they can also bite at night. Certain mosquito species bite at a certain time of day more than other times. People are probably infected and don't have any symptoms usually, or only very mild symptoms. However, in a pregnant woman, fetal infection can occur during the pregnancy if the woman gets infected with the Zika virus, and the infection of the developing fetus results in very severe birth defects. What you get is a microcephaly. The brain doesn't develop and it's very small. It's a very sad thing. There is no virus or specific treatment for Zika. It's there, it exists, it's actually present in a lot of countries. Something to always consider during pregnancy. If you're in one of those areas, and those areas are shown, those countries are shown in this website. Okay, let's go to the last slide, and this is again an emerging infectious disease. It's not that influenza hasn't been around for a long time, but every year there are different newly forming types of substrains of influenza viruses that are emerging and are the major cause of infections worldwide. And I'll talk a lot about this when I talk about in much more detail when I talk about respiratory diseases. It is a major cause of respiratory disease and mortality. Flu epidemics occur regularly. They're widespread outbreaks. Any epidemic is a widespread outbreak in one major geographical region, like Australia, Africa, North America, versus South America. A flu pandemic is when you get a pandemic is a worldwide spread of cases, and every year there are flu epidemics, and occasionally you get flu pandemics. There are three major types of flu viruses that can infect humans. And by the way, the flu virus infects also birds, both domestic and wild, and also pig populations. There are three types of flu viruses major types that can infect humans: type A, or influenza A, B, and C. The type A is responsible for most epidemics and pandemics. Type B can also occasionally cause epidemics, but type A is the most typically important severe type. It can be further subdivided into different variant serotypes based on the presence on the surface of the virus of a protein called H, and that's an abbreviation for a molecule called hemagglutinin. I'll give you that detail when we get to a more full description of this. And so H for hemagglutinin and N for neuraminidase. So there are different variants. H1N1 was the cause of the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic all over the world. Many deaths, millions of deaths. 2009 there was a Hong Kong flu, H1N1, also an a variant of somewhat slightly different variant of H1N1. There is also H5N1, which is an avian flu that occasionally humans get, and it's quite scary because it has a very high mortality rate associated with it. So the point of this lecture was to give you a taste, a feeling, maybe focus you on, the reality and importance of different kinds of infectious disease agents and the importance of microbiology to understand it and to have a feeling for it, and for you guys to have some background understanding. And I just wanted to touch on each of these lightly, and we'll get into more detailed description of them later on. All right, that's the end of this lecture.